Hey guys, welcome back. Well, I thought I'd share with you some findings from a recent little troubleshooting effort that I went through to resolve some issues I have, probably with my flats and generally only with my Luminance images. It's a problem I've been struggling with for a while, and I've tried to ignore it, but the artifacts are just too obnoxious to ignore. So let me show you what I found out. Here's the problem. I have this image here taken with my ED102, and you can see these large circular artifacts that have a 3D kind of effect. You can see a shadow zone and a light zone, and you can, if you count them, you can see about 8 of them, which, kind of is a funny coincidence since I have an 8-position filter wheel. So right away, I'm suspecting some of this that I'm seeing here is not coming from light down the aperture, but rather leaking in around the sides and getting into the filter wheel and making a reflection and sending some light into the sensor that isn't coming through the normal light path that I would get while taking lights. Now, I see these artifacts in one form or another with my reflector and my 3 refractors, so it's a fairly common problem, but then my procedure for taking flats is a common procedure as well, so that probably explains that to some degree. I've seen this artifact when taking t-shirt flats outdoors, as I used to do, and then that's what led me to buy the Pegasus Astro FlatMaster so that I could maybe resolve this flat artifact issue by just being more consistent in the way that I acquire flats. Nope, I still get these artifacts. And one of the things is, at least I'm not seeing the artifacts in my SHO images, and rarely, and certainly not to this extent, in my RGB images. Mostly this is a problem that's confined to the Luminance channel, and so I've decided to go off and do a little troubleshooting to try to play around with the procedure I use for taking flats, and also take a look at the ADU level that I'm using for taking flats to see if there's a solution in there somewhere. This is the setup I use to take flats with my Pegasus Astro FlatMaster. I have the FlatMaster set up at one end. The telescope is positioned so that the optical axis of the telescope lines up with the axis of the FlatMaster. In this case, I'm showing my Celestron C925, but the images you were just seeing were from the ED102. Doesn't matter. I get artifacts either way. By the way, I've plugged the FlatMaster into the power box and then control the FlatMaster through the ultimate power box. I put a box over that in order to cut out and shield from any stray light, and then I put a towel over that to still try to further prevent light from leaking back up into the box and then back into the aperture, and I think it's been pretty successful in preventing that. But as you can see here, I have an exposed filter wheel and an exposed camera, and of course the camera's got very openings. There's some vents here, and there's a fan back here, and who knows if there's a light path that can leak back past the camera sensor and then bounce off the filters in the filter wheel and create these reflections that I'm seeing. That's one thing that is common to the way I'm taking flats here with the FlatMaster, and when I was taking flats outdoors in the early morning daylight with a t-shirt. The camera and the filter wheel were always exposed to extraneous light at a level that they are not exposed to when taking light frames during the night. So with the camera and the filter wheel still exposed to light, I figured that's one variable that I can try to test and eliminate. And so what I did is take this setup, just the telescope and the FlatMaster, and put that into a dark room so that there was no external light, and therefore I didn't need the box, I didn't need the towel. It's just the telescope and the FlatMaster sitting in a dark room. And so I retook some Luminance flats with this configuration, but also took these flats with different ADU levels to see if that was also a variable in preventing these artifacts. This is the flat contour. You can get this from the PixInsight script. Just call up your flat frame and call up the script to have it produce a flat contour. And this is just the default settings here, but it kind of shows you some characteristics of your flat that are interesting to take a look at. First of all, the big fall off in light over here is just the shadow from my off-axis guider. And then if you look here, you can see a scalloped edge here, and it turns out this edge actually corresponds to this circular edge of this most pronounced artifact over here. Likewise, there's a scalloped edge down here that also matches the curved edge of this particular artifact. Now, I don't see any direct evidence of these other fainter artifacts that are in here, but they just might not be showing up because I have such a coarse setting with the flat contour script. Nevertheless, there is something here that suggests that the flats include the effect of these artifacts already in them in a way that probably the original light frames do not, at least not to this extent. There's one other feature up here. This curved feature here is kind of suspicious. However, there's no artifact in the light frame over here that seems to pair up with this. Now let's compare this flat contour with the flat contour I get when I take the same flat in a dark room. Now you can see we have a very similar looking overall contour plot. The OAG, of course, is still there. This dent in the light contour here is still present in the darkened room flat. But what's interesting is that this scalloped edge that we're seeing here and over here have been rectified, or at least significantly altered, by taking the flat in a dark room. So it seems that clearly, at least as far as this flat contour map goes, taking a flat in a dark room, it seems to be having a good effect. But the proof in the pudding is, how does this affect the stacked image? That's, after all, what we're interested in. So let's go and compare the stacked images that we have. Here's the stacked image. I'm using a smaller stack, 1.4 hours versus the 4.6 hours that I showed in the original picture here. But you can still see the artifacts are quite pronounced still here, even in this 1.4 hour stacked image. I have an 8000 ADU flat that I'm taking in the normal way that I showed you, and the camera is exposed to some light. Here is the same stack using an 8000 ADU flat, but in the dark room. And now you can see that the artifacts are not there, or don't appear to be there, at least with this level of stacking that I've got going on here. So clearly, taking the flats in a darkened room is helping quite a bit. Light leaking in through the camera or through the body of the filter wheel itself may be creating these reflections that I'm picking up in my flat frames, but that are not in the light frame. Let's go further and look at different ADU levels and see if that holds true. We're comparing the 8000 ADU flat with the Exposed.Camera, and here we have a 20,000 ADU flat, and frankly this image looks the same as it did for the 8000 ADU. In fact, I'll switch back and forth. 8,000, 20,000, 8,000, 20,000. There's no real difference between these two at all. I can't see any difference, certainly by eye, taking a look at it. I also took a flat at 33,000 ADU, so about mid-range. Once again, we'll bounce back and forth. 20,000, 33,000. Back and forth. It doesn't really, you can't see any difference between the stacked image with the 30,000 ADU flat versus the 20,000, or 20,000 versus the 8,000. And finally, just for grins and giggles, I created a flat with a 40,000 median ADU. And guess what? I don't see any different effect between the 33,000 and the 40,000. So we have 8,000, 20,000, 33,000, 40,000 ADU flats, and we basically see exactly the same thing. So now let's compare the original full stack of about 4.6 hours of data. Very pronounced artifacts here in this stack where the flat was obtained with the camera exposed to that outside light, and here with the camera and filter wheel in a dark room. The effect is much reduced. Now the effect is still there. I don't know if you can pick it up in the resolution of your screen, but I can see the barest hint of the artifact here and a bit here, and a slight shadow of it here as well. So there's still probably some stray light getting into the camera even in the dark room. I guess one of the things that I want to do is to try to cover up the light panel so that any light that it produces does not get back to the camera. But at the very least, significant progress is being made here to eliminate these artifacts, because they are quite difficult to deal with in post-processing. If you're seeing these circular artifacts, I know some of you have commented on this before, but I see them whether I took t-shirt flats or I took the flats with the light panel indoors. In both cases, the camera and filter wheel were exposed to light that they would not be during a nighttime shoot. Some of the flats problems that you hear being talked about on the forums have been traced back to out-of-date dark frames. That's a very subtle effect, and nothing is subtle about the particular effect that I'm looking at with those circular, the 3D circular artifacts that I'm seeing in these images. So in this case, the out-of-date dark frames is not the culprit. I did reacquire the Luminance flats in a dark room and found out that's a big difference. The before and after comparison of the stacked images show that the artifacts are significantly reduced, not totally eliminated yet. Once I prevent that extra stray light, I think I will solve the problem. I also took a look at the flat ADU level I've been using. I've been using a fairly short exposure sensor and therefore a very low ADU level, on the assumption that I want to match as much as I can the median ADU level of my flats with my median ADU level of my lights. And so I've been tending to try to take flats at the low end of the spectrum. It turns out the ADU level has no impact on these artifacts, and in fact when I compare stacked images obtained with flats that are down at the 8,000 ADU level all the way up to the 40,000 ADU level, I don't see any effect at all. The stacked images look identical. So ADU level is not a player here, and in fact ADU level, I think as long as you're within the linear range of your sensor on the camera, the flat ADU level should not matter one bit, and certainly that seems to be the case here. So from now on, it looks like I'll be acquiring flats in a dark room and do everything I can to try to block stray light from getting to the filter wheel and to the camera, just to prevent those reflections. So if you've been having these kinds of problems, I hope these test results are useful to you. Okay guys, well that's all I've got for now. I'll talk to you later. Clear skies, and we'll see you.